the idea is to kind of scale this, like you call them precision drones, into more swarm of drones, to deploy a variety of drones that could inflict quite serious damage beyond, destruction of refineries or some production facilities that we see quite deep inside Russian territory, and make Crimea unattainable for Russians with these consistent but much bigger drone attacks.
Orysia, thank you for joining us on the programme. In terms of Valery Zaluzhny, as commanders go, he was quite an interesting fellow in that he wasn't afraid to put his head above the parapet and talk about more than just tactics and recruitment. He wrote pieces for The Economist and others about almost like the philosophy of war as much as the philosophy of beating the Russians.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ruth. I think he wanted to communicate both to Ukrainians, but also to its allies, that there is a strategy to win this war. And his most recent piece, before he was sacked, actually for the CNN, outlines this pathway of, in 2024, Ukraine needs to come in strategic defense, replenish its forces, and make the kind of technological breakthrough where it could dominate and outweighed Russian position, especially with drones, with electronic warfare, kind of asymmetric approach, because Ukraine has much less men and women that it can, deploy compared to Russia. So he was looking for ways how Ukraine can win it technologically.
It does feel that there is a certain inflection point of vulnerability at the moment, just as you say, because there is an exhaustion in terms of the number of troops that are able to be recruited without a full-scale mobilization in Ukraine. There is the rejection of the aid package through the American houses, which was going to deliver the weaponry that's needed to overcome the disparity in terms of bodies and boots on the ground. And now there is this change of political leadership as well. Is there any vulnerability for the president here? Could the populace who've got behind him at some point turn against him?
It's an interesting decision that Zelensky takes, and it's the first one that actually goes against the public opinion since the start of the war. General Zaluzhny is hugely popular. He's actually more popular than President Zelensky. His approval ratings were around, 80%, while President Zelensky in the 60s. So you could see that he was trusted, by the population. He was also supported and trusted by the ground troops, and many spoke quite, well of his approach to war. But you're right that this war is not going to the plan, partially because of Ukraine's own exhaustion, but to a large degree because Ukraine doesn't have a kit and material to actually, keep resisting Russian counteroffensives and also defend, Ukrainian cities from increasing barrage of missiles. So we'll have to see what the new commander-in-chief, Syrskyi, will be able to achieve at such difficult point of time.
Well, let's talk about him, because as we said, the person that he's replacing, the one that's been sacked, Zaluzhny, had a certain level of profile that was high and that went beyond just military circles. In terms of General Alexander Syrskyi, he's, as I understand it, he's actually a pretty battle-hardened general. I mean, he's seen a lot of action. There is a level of tactical respect there and experience there, and also looking at him, he's an absolute giant bear of a man. He's enormous compared to Zelensky standing next to him. I mean, I if I was a private or a lance corporal, I don't think I would tell the general that I wasn't going to do whatever he was commanding me to do.
Well, Zaluzhny wasn't a small man neither.
But, no, that's true.
But what is interesting is that, General Syrskyi comes, not as an outsider. He was serving under Zaluzhny's leadership as the commander of ground force. He actually previously, before the full-scale invasion, was appointed as the head of Ukrainian operation of Joint Command Force in the Donbass by former President Poroshenko. He knows the battlefield. He understands the importance of the infantry, but also there's a controversial, information that he was perhaps ready to sacrifice more troops for political gains. such as the legendary battle for Bakhmut, where Ukraine was trying to hold desperately defenses, whereas some military commentators were saying perhaps it was more expedient to move the troops away. But it was such a symbol for Zelensky to prove that Ukraine can hold ground. And Syrskyi was kind of loyal and willing to pursue that strategy. So he is experienced for sure. He knows all the problems and bottlenecks. He is speaking now that his main task is to actually properly supply the troops, to rotate them, to make sure the mobilization is successful. And also he keeps also speaking about technological upper hand that Ukraine must achieve, especially now that Ukraine has created a new type of force, which is the air drone force and technological unmanned vehicles that it wants to increasingly use, especially this year. And Zelensky said Ukraine must produce 1 million of drones. That is a very serious force that they are trying to deploy.
Yeah, I'm interested by the drones because we've seen some of the kind of almost, I was going to say propaganda, that's maybe unfair, certainly some of the PR around their efficacy and their ability to pick off various pieces of Russian materiel, whether that's ships or missiles or whatever. But there is still an argument that the surgical strikes that drones can make are nothing compared to the hits that conventional artillery, for example, are still making, and particularly where the two sets of troops are dug in on both sides of the river as you get to kind of Crimea and around south of Mykolaiv and around Odessa.
Well, the war exactly reached this point of deadlock because it is mainly an artillery war. Ukraine had even artillery advantage this summer, but then it started losing it as Western supplies started draining. And we do see that European Union that promised Ukraine to produce 1 million rounds of 155 milliliter shells is not actually delivering it. That is why the idea is to kind of scale these, like you call them precision drones, into more swarm of drones, to deploy a variety of drones that could inflict quite serious damage beyond, destruction of refineries or some production facilities that we see quite deep inside Russian territory, and make Crimea unattainable for Russians with these consistent but much bigger drone attacks.
And in terms of morale within the country and those areas which have gone back to work in Kyiv and elsewhere, where life looks very much day to day as if it is carrying on as close to normal as is possible, and there's economic output and all the rest of it. I mean, what is the sense there? Is there still a will for this to go on for as long as it takes, or is there a real exhaustion now within the populace?
Well, Ruth, I think people in Ukraine understand they have no alternative because this is such an existential war. Of course, there's tiredness. Of course, there's bitterness for the West that the aid and assistance is slowing down and is blocked in the Congress. But I think Ukrainians remain determined simply because they have no other way. I mean, the public opinion shows that numbers of those who still believe Ukraine can win are holding. Now it's an inflection point in terms of more men and women will have to be mobilized to the front line. Economy will have to shift more to a war footing to exactly deliver production of these high-tech equipment that Ukraine needs. But this seems to me bitter and wounded Ukrainians still show fortitude and resolve they have to defend against Russian invasion. Let's remember, Putin is not giving up on taking more of Ukrainian territory. So it's not like there's some kind of stalemate on the battlefield. Russians are moving and pushing forward.